level, but there are teams like a Texas that you know so much is coming back that you can say, all right, we can go ahead and place them near the top and just expect they'll sort of hover around there this offseason.
Yeah, and
let me ask you a question about what he just said, what Craig, you just said. We've discussed over and over for years about how they have been highly thought of and have been overrated. Not their fault, but those who do the rankings. Fans can be ahead of themselves, but that's for every fan base, not just them. What's the difference in 8 years ago or 2 or 3 years ago? Because this team does seem to be getting what is legitimate smoke, where all the other smoke was just possibly maybe a leaf on fire.
Well, I think not 2 good seasons in a row, but I think more faith in the coach, I guess, than they have in the past.
But we heard that about Tom Herman.
Yeah. I don't know if we ever really did. I mean, like, I guess
no, when they won the Sugar Bowl, when they were coming off the Sugar Bowl, there was full throttle, hair on fire. Okay, they've made it past. This is,
but you know,
and it didn't work.
You know, when I think a lot of people like maybe started to question Tom Herman is coming off that Sugar Bowl. You go to Big 12 Media Days and you listen to the guy rant like a wild person about random stuff, and you're like, dude, you're supposed to be pretty good. Like, you feel like you're a little unhinged here. And it started to get to him. But I don't know. I mean, like, Smokey, that's a great question.
What
I mean,
started to get to him? Expectations?
Yeah.
Okay.
Being the coach at Texas is as hard as it's going to be almost anywhere, because it almost would be better for the head coach had they not won in 2005, right? Because now all those people know that it's possible in this generation, because the last time that Texas had won it, it was a generation of football that was completely different than it was. And now we're at from 2005 to now, we're at a generational change in football. So those pressures get kind of big, and maybe people don't realize it because they feel like 2005 wasn't that long ago. But in college football terms, it might as well have been 50 years ago with how much has changed in the last 3 years. So, yeah, I think it's that. I mean, you're right, Smokey. There's nothing that is concrete that says that this team will definitely improve or be better than the year prior, because that's kind of been their thing. When they have a good year, they follow it up with being wildly disappointing. But it does seem like they are making good decisions at quarterback, depth-wise, and it's not just – I mean, they've made a great decision. Sam Ellinger was a great college quarterback. I think any team –
Wait a minute.
Was a very good college quarterback.
Okay.
And maybe could have been great had he been in a better situation. I'm not talking about university-wise, but coaching-wise, system-wise, consistency-wise, using all the weapons available to him, as opposed to what Tom Herman's offense was called Sam. And
well, I know, but that made his stats even bigger.
That made his stats better.
But he may have been more successful win-loss had it not been so much reliant on him.
Exactly. Okay. So Sam could have been even more well thought of had he not had to do everything. So I think now they're at least moving in the direction of where, okay, well, Sam goes out, right? All right, well, Shane Buechele comes in until he transfers, and then you had all that just pressure on the quarterback. Again, it's the Texas and the Cowboys kind of overlapping, where the answer to every question is, well, Tony Romo or Dak Prescott will do everything, just like Texas's answer was Sam Ellinger will do everything. Now it appears that even though they got Quinn Ewers, a guy they're developing, that it's not going to be completely incumbent upon him. And he's shown, at least at this point in his career, that he's not the guy who's going to go out and win the game for you if he doesn't have, balance on offense around him.
I think it's pretty simple with Texas. I just think it's the amount of players they have coming back. I mean, yes, they lose Bijan and Roschon. Those are two big losses. There's no doubt about that. But because you've recruited well, you're talking about Cedric Baxter, and you're talking about Jaden Blue, and you're talking about Jonathan Brooks. So on paper, people feel like that there's not going to be much of a drop-off. Now, I think there could be, because Bijan and Roschon are both special players. But you have your quarterback back. This next-level, five-star, all-everything quarterback who's going to be, coming back with a full year under his belt of playing time. So he should be better, no? He should be better. Quinn Ewers should be better. Their offensive line, that is basically babies that they, paid to get. I mean, they put up the money and reworked that O-line and, brought in a bunch of dudes a couple years back, and now they're going to be mature. Your wide receiver room is pretty stacked. When you look at Xavier Worthy, and you look at Isaiah Nayor coming back, and you look at Jordan Whittington coming back, and Isaiah Nayor, of course, will be coming off of the injury, but they're loaded there. Tight end. they're loaded. They got Jadavian Sanders coming back. Defensively, they lose some guys. They lose a couple of their tackles. They lose a couple guys in the secondary. But I don't really ever worry about UT's secondary because they get like 5 guys a year in the secondary that are 4-star rated higher. And I'm embellishing a little bit, but not by much. I mean, that's not really ever an issue for them. D-line, they've recruited really well there as well. And you're getting some of your better players back on that side of the football. You're not losing really anything coaching-wise. You lost, Brennan Marion, right? And maybe there was one other that I'm not thinking of. But for the most part, I don't think it was somebody that, like I would have been more worried more than a position guy leaving if, like, Gary Patterson was no longer an analyst. Like, he's still there as far as I know. Their defense was really good by most standards and was – playing, very confidently, and I felt like the offense, was entirely centered around Bijan most of the time, but it's an offensive-led football program. Their coach is an offensive guru, genius, whatever you want to label him as. So I understand that every year they are overrated in some form or fashion, or every other year, or however you want to phrase it. But like I said yesterday, if there was a year for them to be overrated, or for there to be a microscope on them and say, like, this is the year that there should be some pretty high expectations, I feel like with your quarterback, your O-line, a lot of your weapons, a lot of your defense all coming back, if it's not the year next year, then when's it going to be the year?
That's a great point.
That's kind of where I'm coming from here, because K-State's losing 2 of their best players. Baylor, we have no idea what they're going to look like. Texas Tech has a lot of confidence, but you're going to take their roster versus UT's right now? I'm not, but they could be maybe that's who they play in the title game. But just on paper, and I know that's every year, but it's on paper, and it's following a year where you saw progress from a lot of their team, and so that's where I am with them. I just think they stack up as well as anybody.
The thing I think that is, and I just started putting all these numbers together, one of the things, it seems like they went through about 10 years of hell based on the standard of 2008, of course, or 9, playing for the national title. They had the run of 14 through 17. They had 3 losing seasons and 1 team that was 7-6, Herman's first year. But in the last 5 years, 10-4, and then, of course, that's the Sugar Bowl win against Georgia. The expectations skyrocketed. They win 8-5. COVID, they were 7-3. It's almost as if they were better. Not many people remember COVID. I mean, we remember COVID, but not a lot of records. Like, I think Michigan might have been 2-6 during COVID. And again, I don't know that. Maybe that was Penn State. Doesn't matter. But then, coming out of COVID, 5-7. And then last year they were 8-5, and yes, there were, again, late game meltdowns or some losses, the bowl game. You're right. I know they have a lot coming back. Man, it's like what 2 days ago, Kirk Bohl said, they have not won 10 games in the regular season since the national championship game team in 2009.
Well, it's
been a long, long time.
It's called expectations. I mean, I understand what they haven't done, but they should be expected to win a bunch of games next year, and so that's where I'm coming from. It's not that
but they've been expected to win a lot of games every year.
Sure, and they didn't live up to it, or they did.
Yeah.
That's not really my point here. My point is that, I mean, whether they lived up to it or not, that's not really the issue. The point is whether they live up to it or not next year, there are expectations. There are expectations that they are going to be expected to be right there in the Big 12. If they don't make the Big 12 title game next year, I think that's a failure. Barring some sort of major injuries with your O-line, Ewers, Whittington, Nayor, Worthy,
Mitchell,
Sanders, Mitch. I mean, like, what more do you need? Do you need another class of 5 stars and everybody else coming back again?
But then you have to stop people.
But their defense was pretty good last year.
No, it was much better. That defense, to me, was why they were in a position to be dangerous, not just because they could score.
So you lose a couple guys on the D-line. I understand that. But you've got a lot of players that are coming back. And, again, in the secondary, you lose a couple of players there as well. But I don't really worry. Like I said a few minutes ago, I don't worry about their secondary replacing talent. I mean, barring some guy who's like a surefire top 10 corner, but they don't have that, then, yeah, you'd go, okay, well, maybe that's going to be a hiccup. But they're not losing that. They're losing some good players. D-line, they've recruited really, really well. I mean, as well as probably anybody over the years. So, point to me where you think there's a weakness, and that's fine. But I think in comparison to who they're lining up against, and let's also look at the fact that we don't know the schedule yet, but they're not going to be playing the same Big 12 that they've been playing. There's going to be a couple games on there where they're going to be definitely favored over UCF or Cincinnati or Houston or BYU. They'll be favored over all 4 of those teams, bar none, no question about it. And they're going to play at least probably a couple of those teams. So I think
Going
the
into
schedule.
the year, there probably maybe one game right now that they may not be favored, and normally you could say that's Oklahoma, but that wouldn't be the case, at least if they head up today, right now.
Yeah, they're not going to be favored. Right. I mean, they're not going to be underdogs to Oklahoma. So, I mean, look at. I don't even need to see their schedule to know. Outside of Alabama, they're probably going to be favored in every single game.
Yeah.
But weren't they that last year?
Yes,
except Alabama.
But the point isn't what they were and what they did. The point is that's the expectation.
Yeah.
I know. My point is, and I'm not arguing with you, I'm trying to say, yes, it's the expectation, but we've heard that year after year. And if they do well this year, thank God for them.
What are we talking about? We're talking about expectations for next year.
Look, I think you're also.
No, I understand that. What I'm saying is the expectations for next year have been there every year.
I think this, though, like, you can maybe break them down into what were, like, legitimate and what were the lazy, like, Texas expectations.
Yeah.
Because
I just laid out all the reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
But there have been other years when they've had a lot of people
I'm
not arguing whether they should be this year. They should be. Yes, I agree.
I'm going to, like, just looking at historically, so post-Mac Brown, let's just take the last couple of years of Mac out of it.
I don't think Texas fans want to do that.
Well, I know, but would, like, just be realistically. So Charlie Strong did a thing where he didn't want any new facilities, any new stuff, and all those kind of things that Texas does until they started winning, and inadvertently kind of put himself behind the 8 ball. They also had a bad athletic director at that time, taking over from the greatest athletic director who's ever athletic director, depending on the Paul Catalina metric. I mean, there are good and bad things about it, but, like, DeLoss Dodds essentially invented the modern position of that job. So went from DeLoss Dodds to Patterson. So they had a bad athletic director for a while, for a couple years, and then they kind of went through interim athletic director and all of that. That changes thing. You know, we talk about that spine, president, athletic director, coach, all the way down. And really, Tom Herman didn't get that in his first go either. But I think Charlie Strong wasn't recruiting. He was kind of following up how Mac Brown was recruiting, because he had it in his head that they were still getting good players, but they just weren't being coached up the right way, and that's what he was going to do. He could still get those guys, but what Mac Brown was doing wrong at the end of his tenure was he wasn't looking at guys who fit what they were going to do. He was just looking at
stars.
At stars.
He was also by then had started to become more of a CEO.
Yeah, so they weren't recruiting. They weren't looking at level by level like the elite coaches do. And Charlie Strong didn't continue to do that. Maybe Tom Herman started to do that, but Tom Herman's problem wasn't, again, getting the talent in. It was developing it and keeping his wits about him and not, kind of getting off track on stuff that doesn't matter. He almost
disintegrated himself.
Yeah, he didn't focus on things that don't matter. Now, the benefit of Steve Sarkisian is, look, this is boom or bust head coach for him, or he's an offensive coordinator for the rest of his career. And he's already come through a lot of stuff in his life. And now, there have been 3 coaches who failed in a row, including the guy who won the national championship in Mac Brown, Charlie Strong, and Tom Herman. So I think that realistically in the building, they're at a time where they know who they are and know what they've done wrong because enough time has passed. But I don't think that it happened for Charlie Strong or for
We got
Tom
into
Herman.
this because I asked the question, and it's a great conversation. Is it too early to start looking at who might be next year? And, of course, in the Big 12 is what we're focused on, but it could be anybody else. And if you look at it, everybody seems to have a lot of questions, including the unknown still at Oklahoma, although they had a hell of a class. And they're bringing in people, too, and it's year 2 with Venables. Baylor's kind of like, well, we don't know. Can TCU reload after what they had and who they had coming back? And it does appear as if legitimately, where in the last 8 to 12 years, it hasn't been, the expectation with Texas leading to the next year might be more legitimate than it's been in the last decade. And so you act like, Craig, you think I'm disagreeing with you. I'm not. I'm just using that we've been here before, but based on how it's not just almost about Texas. It's also about Oklahoma was always the known. Mm-hmm. They're not. Kansas State, can they follow up? TCU, can they follow up? Can Baylor be who they were 2 years ago? How much on fire is Tech in following up 8-5 to whatever they might be? And, yeah, that's why I'm asking the question. It's very much legitimate. It's a great conversation. But looking at what everybody else has, and because of some of the unknowns, including Oklahoma and Norman, and what Gundy's doing and what he's gone through at Stillwater, you're probably right. that what they have coming back, it would be hard for us to look at it if they don't make it the Big 12 championship. But again, that's not what they've done in a long, long time.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't care if you disagree, and I'm not really trying to act one way or the other. I'm just trying to, I was trying to get my point across that you're asking, what's different about now? And I'm laying it out of why I think it's different is the multiple reasons why, and really what happened before on my end here doesn't matter. That's the thing. You ask, well, but it's been before. Okay, who cares? That's before. Those teams didn't live up to it. I get that. They've been overrated before. I get that. But why is this year different? The quarterback, the O-line, the skill players, the defense, the coaches coming back, the recruiting, the schedule. I mean, that's why. I mean, those are the reasons why I think this year is different and why if they're in the top 15, they're not being overrated, or they're in the top 10, they're not being overrated and getting the bump because of the logo. I think that has happened multiple times in the past. I think that that's happened more often than not. I don't think that Tom Herman was a bad football coach. I think that era is being looked at a little bit differently than it should. He was just a bad personality. He was a bad fit personality-wise. His football teams were not that bad, and I wonder how good they might have been if he had a couple more years and if he had his head on a little more straight, honestly, because...
Or just matured,
I mean, that was really what it was. It wasn't that he was some terrible football coach. He was just a goof, and he took that to a level that he probably shouldn't have, to where it just didn't really paint the program in a great light with him being the main face of it. So, yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from of why is it different. But like I said, I laid it out, and that's why I believe, and I don't care if somebody else feels differently, they feel differently, but that's why I believe this year is different. And I don't just put them there because that's the natural placeholder. If they're going to be a Big 12 favorite and be genuinely deserving of that, then tell me why this year isn't the year. Because I look around, like we said earlier, and we can run down all these teams, but outside of Texas Tech, Surge, outside of TCU, right, there's nobody else that you're looking at and saying, oh, yeah, well, that's definitely. So we started off saying, can you make determinations about teams? I said that I don't think there's a lot of them. I think there's a lot of them that you don't know quite yet. But with Texas, there are a lot of answers that we do, or questions that we do have answers to, and there's not a ton of questions, especially in comparison to other schools in the Big 12. So that's where I'm coming out with them. I don't know who I'd have them playing in the title game, but I think given their roster, that if they're not in that title game next year, barring some health issues like to Quinn Ewers or someone along that line, then I think that's a disappointment. And maybe my expectations are too high, but I have to imagine those are the expectations in Austin as well, with Sarkisian entering his third year.
If they don't do what you say, then Paxton, we will have to put you on a monitor. We will have to look at you along with Austin, Texas, and a lot of others. By the way, Austin, Texas, Cedric Baxter is that dude when it comes to replacing Bijan. Here's another one of my, again, trends. UT has always had a blue-chip, five-star alpha dog running back. Sometimes they just didn't know what to do with them. Now they appear to have somebody that does because of what we saw. But even then, they didn't use Bijan properly in some games and lost those games. But, yeah, Cedric Baxter. But they get, my God, I mean, turn around, and they'll get another one in this class, and they'll get another one next class. It's a great place for running backs, and the tradition is there from way back in the day.
Okay, so they lose their running backs, and they lose two really good ones in Bijan and Roschon, but that's a position that we feel like they probably have recruited pretty well, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
The secondary, they lose a couple guys, but they bring some guys back, but that's a position they typically recruit well, right?
Yep.
Defensive line, they lose some guys, but they pretty much recruit well, right? So, those are probably their three areas where they lost the most, and those are three areas where they've recruited exceptionally well. So if those are your holes compared to other people's holes, they're in way better position than any other school in the conference at the very least.
Yeah, and the other thing that